Welcome to our first week of presenters for Science Colloquium. We are honored to have our very own Greg Petrics kind of kick things off for us. He is in math and data science, and he's here to present his research, and you can see he's got lots of collaborators. And for those of you interested in exercise science or health science, this one is right up your alley. So thank you very much, Greg.
Thanks.
Sorry, Greg.
So, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm going to give you a talk today about determination of expiratory flow limit exercise in adults using artificial intelligence. I'm out of breath, I'm sure you are too. So that's why I give it a slightly easier to say and understand title. Intro to AI and something good it's doing. Because I think people hear AI these days, and except for ChatGPT when it helps you out with your homework, I think there's also a lot of fear that it's going to be like stealing jobs and maybe not helping as much as it might be hurting things. So I think this is a pretty good use case of artificial intelligence, and it's something that I've been working on for a couple years with a whole big team that you can see here. So there are, I didn't even count how many people there are, and this isn't even the whole list. So my name is Greg Petrics. I'm at the top, italicized there. And then there's been 4 undergraduates from the Johnson campus who have helped work on this project. Corrine Owens, who was an early college student and then transferred to another school. Amy Vetters, who is a Bachelor of Arts, actually she's probably a BS, in data science. Kara Howell is a BA in mathematics. And Sogi Ndai is a current data science major. He is in his 3rd year. So those are the undergraduates that have worked on this. And then out in Washington State, I have a collaborator, Hans Haberkamp. He's a professor of exercise physiology out there. And his grad student researcher, Peter Liu, is working on this. And then there's also another collaborator at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, Thomas DeCato, who has helped me out working on this project. So, plan for today. I've got 4 things I want to leave time for. I want to let you know a little bit about myself. I know some of you. I see some people from my first year seminar this year. See some people from last year's first year seminar. I think I saw Maya somewhere. Anyway, then an introduction to machine learning, or it's a part of artificial intelligence to let you know what the field is all about. Maybe you've heard AI and machine learning, and maybe you know what it is, but I'm suspecting that you probably don't know what it really is. So I'll give you a sense of what it really is. Then I'll talk a little bit about my actual research project. I can make my research sound really complicated, or I can make it sound really simple, and I'll do a little bit of both. The really complicated bits are to make me feel better about myself. And then when I try to make it sound really simple, that's so that you can actually understand what I'm doing. And then I hope to leave some time for questions at the end. And about those questions, feel free to shout them out at any time. So if you've got a question and you want to ask it, just shout it out. I'm happy to entertain questions as we go. Okay, so about me, that's my avatar. I always think it's kind of funny. My iPhone gave it to me, and I always put it in my talks. So I'm Professor Greg Petrics. I'm in the Math and Computer Science Department at Vermont State University, obviously here on the Johnson campus. My office is in this building. It's up on the 3rd floor next to the Fractal. If you see me there and you want to say hi, feel free. I've been teaching courses here and advising students here on math, data science, and computer information systems. This is my 13th year. I can't believe how many years I've been doing this for, but I'm really excited to continue working here. And feel free to call me Greg, so you don't have to call me Dr. Petrics or Professor. You can just say, Greg, what's up? I have a question. And there's my email, greg.petrics@vermontstate.edu, if you want to get in touch with me. And feel free to email anytime. So my background, I'll go back to high school, because I'm sure some of you are fresh from high school. So I went to Woodstock Union High School in Vermont. And there I specialized in baseball and ski racing. There's not really a major in high school, so I didn't know what to say about that. But I thought that would be sort of a fun thing to know about. And then I went to Middlebury College to do my undergraduate degree. I graduated in 2006 with a Bachelor of Arts in Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and a BA in Teacher Education. I actually got licensed to become a secondary educator, and I was actually teaching in a high school when my advisor from undergrad said, you know, you've been doing a lot of research with me, and I actually studied abroad when I was an undergraduate. I went over to Europe and studied in Hungary, mathematics and applied mathematics. And they said, you should consider going to grad school. It's a really good deal. In the math and the science realm, grad school can actually turn into a pretty decent financial proposition. You end up getting your tuition waived at many programs, and you even get paid if you teach courses. And I said, that sounds pretty good, because I was going to be a teacher anyway, getting paid to teach courses, so I might as well get a free education. And so I actually kept going, and I went to Dartmouth for my master's degree in mathematics, got that in 2008, and then the PhD in 2011 in mathematics and higher education. And I've been here ever since. When I finished up at Dartmouth, I just moved up to Johnson, and here I am. For work, 12 years, that should actually say, I guess 12 full years, and I'm working on 13 here, math, data science. When I started here, it was called Johnson State College. Then up until last year, it was Northern Vermont University, and now, of course, you all know it's Vermont State University. What will it be next? I've also been a professor for 7 years at what's called the Vermont Mathematics Initiative. That's a master's granting program. It used to be at UVM, then it was at SNHU, Southern New Hampshire University, and now it's actually back at Vermont State University. And that's a master's program that grants, like a master's in education for people who want to teach in a way that they're highly specialized with mathematics education. So that's something cool that I do. That's mostly in the summertime. And then I'm also a data analytics instructor online at what used to be called the Northern Vermont University Center for Professional Studies. I don't know what it's called now, but it's still called the Professional Studies. I guess it's VTSU, Center for Professional Studies. So I've had a whole bunch of different research projects over the years. When I was in undergraduate, the thing that I found really fascinating, I still find it fascinating, was what were called length optimizing curves. So it's pretty easy if you don't have anything in your way, the fastest way to get from point A to B is what? Straight line, in harmony next time. And then that's pretty straightforward, but then what happens if there's something in your way? What's the best way to get from A to B if there's a bunch of chairs in your way? If I want to get from here to the exit, I have to go a little bit right, then I have to go, what's that? Some sort of a triangle, yeah. And then what happens though if the space is curved, if you're on a sphere, or if you're on a donut, or if you're inside some sort of funky space-time that bends around in curves? You can kind of see where that might get a little bit more interesting. The fastest way to from point A to B in bendy spaces with obstructions is kind of hard to know. And so that was my original research program back as an undergraduate. That's what I thought I wanted to study in grad school. Then when I got to grad school, I realized that really wasn't the best choice to study because at the time, it was kind of a completely open and closed field. There wasn't a lot of applications for it, and the problems were all sort of, I don't know, they were like toy problems. And so I got involved in what I guess you'd call biologically inspired artificial neural networks for image processing. So that was a very specific part of artificial intelligence called artificial neural networks. They're meant to kind of replicate how our brain processes information. And up until maybe 15 years ago, artificial neural networks were very loosely resembling our actual neural networks in our heads. And so when I was in grad school, I worked on projects that were trying to make neural networks that functioned more like the neural networks that are in our head. And so I focused primarily on studying neural networks that mimic the way that our visual cortex works, to try to understand how our neurons actually process information to represent it, to give us a visual representation of the world outside of our brains. That was a fun project. It sounds complicated, but it's really just a bunch of Calc 3. It's really not that. Sounds like an AI brain. Yeah, it really was. I mean, it was an AI visual cortex was what that was about. I actually gave a talk in this exact series maybe like 7 or 8 years ago on that project. And then for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working in applications of artificial neural networks to problems in thoracic healthcare. Thoracic means, as an adjective, anybody know? It's actually right there on the screen, so you do know. Pulmonary or lung function. So thoracic healthcare, lung function stuff. So my collaborator, Hans Haverkamp, out in Washington State, he is a thoracic researcher. That means that he studies lung function primarily, particularly when people are exercising, studying the patterns of how they breathe air in, and especially how they expire or exhale the air out. And so there's a lot of different problems that you can study in this area. And I am not a healthcare, like I haven't been trained in health science specifically, but there's a lot of cool problems there that have become really well suited to an approach from AI, and that's what I'm here to talk about today, actually. And so there's actually, I'll talk about that later. And then I figured I'd just share a little bit of fun stuff with you before we get into the academic stuff. So for fun, I have all sorts of fun things that I like to do on the side. So in the past, I've been a photographer for ski areas and snow sports publications. I took that picture of Mount Mansfield at sunrise above the clouds, and I got it published in Powder magazine, and I was really happy about that. That was actually the day that Trump was inaugurated, January 20th, 2017. And so there was that pretty picture that morning. So featured in several photo galleries. That's the lead illustration there. And then the other thing that I like to do is I like to crawl around in the woods and on rocks. And so I'm active in the local rock climbing community. That's me putting a bolt in on a climb up in Smuggler's Notch. All right, so that's enough about me. Let's talk about machine learning. So machine learning is a part of artificial intelligence. Machine learning is a part of artificial intelligence. And machine learning occurs when a computer is given answers about a data set and produces rules to connect the data with those answers. And my job for the next 10 minutes or so is to help you understand what this sentence means. But before we get into really unpacking that sentence, it might be helpful to compare machine learning with what's sometimes called traditional computer programming. So if you've ever used a calculator to calculate anything, you've done traditional computer programming. And maybe you've done even more than that. Maybe you've coded in something like Python or Java or something like that. And so in traditional programming, there's a paradigm, and you can see this picture on top here, where you develop rules and you apply those rules to data that you provide, and then the computer gives you answers out of it. So for instance, if you were trying to detect if a sign was a stop sign or a pedestrian sign, the data would be a bunch of pictures of stop signs and pedestrian signs, and the rules that you might come up with might be something like stop signs are usually red, they have a shape like an octagon, and what might you say about a pedestrian sign? Any rules that you might tell the computer? Yeah, go ahead, shout it out.
So it would usually be like
Orangish, yellow, yeah.
And would typically have two stick figures.
Yeah, if you could identify those stick figures on there. It might also be the shape of the sign might be like a triangle or something like that. And so in traditional programming, you provide the data, you provide the rules, then the computer follows those rules and then gives you answers. So it would tell you, this is a picture of a stop sign. This is a picture of a pedestrian sign. This is a picture of a pedestrian sign. In machine learning, it's completely different. So you don't come up with the rules in machine learning. That's actually the output of machine learning. In machine learning, you provide the data and you provide the answers. So I'll have maybe, or you might have if we work together sometime, you might have 500 different pictures of stop signs and 500 different pictures of pedestrian signs. And you tell the computer, these are 500 pictures of a stop sign, these are 500 pictures of a pedestrian sign. Now go, and there's specific algorithms or computer programs that do this. It learns how to connect those pictures with the answers. Which ones are stop signs, which ones are pedestrian signs. So the output of machine learning is rules, not answers, which is a little bit different than the way that you might think about what a traditional program does. So I always think that's kind of helpful. So I have a little demonstration here. It's just a video that we're going to watch. It's only about a minute long. It's a little bit tough to see, so I apologize if that's the case for you in the back rows. If it's tough to see for you in the back rows, you're welcome to move up. You just put your extra $5 fee on the table, and I'll make sure that that goes to where it's supposed to go. It's a joke. You don't have to pay $5 to move up. But if it is tough to see, I think this is kind of a good example, this video, of what machine learning is like. You are the machine that I'm going to try to have learn. So what you're going to see is you're going to see 40 images, and by images I mean very loosely 16 pixel images. So usually, does anybody know how many pixels an image usually has? Yeah, go ahead.
I want you to say roughly 272 maybe 600.
Yeah, like usually 200 by 600 or something like that, 1,000 by 1,000. So like around 1,000,000 pixels usually. So we're only dealing with 16 pixels here. So you can kind of see them. There's 4 in the top, then four rows of 4. And then we are getting information. So that's the data. And then the answers are these labels down here, or types. And so when I play the video, you're going to be presented with 40 different pieces of data and 40 different answers. And then we're going to see if we can come up with some rules to connect that. That's kind of how machine learning works. So here, I'll play this video. Like I said, it's a little tough to see.
They're changing colors.
There is changing colors in there, yeah. So the challenge will come in a moment when we get to, after the 40, we'll get to some that are unlabeled, so we don't know what type they are. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video right there. So anybody notice how many different types there were? Along the bottom, there was a lot of information blasted at you. But I'm trying to put you in the mind of a computer. No, there was 3 different types. There was L's, S's, and P's. And that was it, actually. A lot of information to digest here. But this is how it works normally for machine learning. And maybe I might go back and play it from the beginning one more time. And the goal would be, like, could we figure out what type this is? Did we learn enough from that data and those answers to come up with some rules that might tell us what type this is? So let me play it one more time and see if we could figure out what image 42 is. All right, ready? Here we go. And if you want to move forward, you can. I said, here we go. All right, there we go. Oh, looks like I'm telling you what they are. Those letters are speed limits, pedestrians, and stop signs. That's fine. Try to pause it on image 42 here. Okay, so I didn't want to tell you what the data was, because then you're leveraging your human brain in a way that's unfair to the computer. The computer it doesn't know what a stop sign is and what a pedestrian sign is and what a speed limit sign is. So it's fine to just tell it P, L, and S. But you all know what these signs look like, so now you have an unfair advantage over a computer. But any guesses what this one is, just based on the 16 pieces of information you've got? It's not a trash can. It's one of those 3. Oh, pedestrian. Sorry, I misheard you. I thought you said trash can. It is not a pedestrian sign. What makes you think that, though? It has the same number of dots. They're all 16. But maybe you're saying like some of them are like a little bit lighter colored. Can anybody pick up on the actual shading of the pixels? Think it's stop? Why are you thinking that? Looks reddish, yeah. And so, yeah, this one, even though they're very small, this is a picture of a stop sign. So it's a 16 pixel picture of a stop sign. So that's kind of how machine learning works. You feed the computer a pile of answers that are connected to a pile of data, and then it learns how to come up with rules that it can apply to new data like this one, which is correct. Taylor's correct, right. That's actually is a picture of a stop sign. And we have a whole bunch more. I could try one more. Any guesses about that one? The color might give it away. It is not a speed limit sign. Speed limit signs are usually white. And I know the colors are pretty hard to see. So the yellow, this one's actually a pedestrian sign. All right, so in case you're wondering, the data here are 16 pixel images of three different types of street signs: pedestrian, speed limit, and stop signs. And definitely when you got to know what they were, it was maybe a little bit better for you easier for you to understand. And it turns out this is actually a really good problem for machine learning. It's really not even hard to train a computer to figure out what those 16 pixels images are with some pretty limited training data. And if you're interested in this sort of stuff, I teach a course in the spring that you all are invited to take. It's called Statistical Computing in R. And you could email me if you wanted to see about enrolling in that course and studying the actual way that you set up a machine learning algorithm to learn to make an estimate of what type of street sign is being presented to it. It's called image classification. OK, so that's machine learning. Let me try to explain it a slightly different way here. So another way to explain machine learning, it's basically the same as what I said before, is that machines learn from data where the answers or labels are already known. So for example, step one might be to show a machine learning algorithm a whole bunch of pictures of cats. So this picture is meant to represent stacks of pictures of cats. And the machine is trying to figure out what are the features of all these pictures of cats that make a picture of a cat a cat. After you train a machine learning algorithm on many different pictures of a cats, then it's ready for step two. So this would be like after training it on a bunch of street signs, it's ready for step two, which is a challenge, which is after learning, the machine is challenged to predict the answers or labels on new data that it hasn't seen before. And so this would be the second part of any machine learning workflow. You give it a bunch of pictures it hasn't seen before. So that's these three pictures on the left. And then the machine learning algorithm, after the learning has taken place, is able to sort those pictures into its best guess of what it thinks are cats up top and what it thinks are not cats down bottom. And that's pretty much what machine learning is all about. You have two phases. I'll just go back one slide here. You have the training phase where you give it a bunch of data with answers. And then you have the challenge phase where after it's been trained, you see how it does on data that it hasn't seen before. Can it use the rules that it came up with to come up with answers or labels for pictures it hasn't seen before? In this case, this hypothetical machine is predicting whether something is a picture of a cat or not a cat. And if you're wondering, like, OK, like, what is this thing actually? It's a little bit too much to explain in today's meeting here. But at the end of the day, these machine learning algorithms, neural networks they're often called, they're just made up of a bunch of very basic mathematical functions. Very, very simple stuff where a number comes in and something mathematical happens to it, like squares it or hits it with an exponential function like 2 to the x, and then a number comes out. So very simple mathematical functions are the guts of these neural networks, but there's lots of them, and I mean lots of them. A typical neural network will often have, that does anything of interest, will typically have maybe like 500,000 very simple mathematical elements that come together to learn how to predict if something is a picture of a cat or a dog. And so this diagram is meant to try to help us understand this idea. We've got a picture of a cat. It goes into a neural network, and each of those gray dots you should be thinking of is basically some very simple mathematical function, like squaring or exponential functions. Or I don't want to scare anybody when I say this word, but the reality is they're mostly logarithms. I know people don't love logarithms because they've had bad math classes in high school, but a lot of times that's one of the most common elements of a neural network is a logarithm. Don't be scared. It's not that complicated. You just have the computer do it anyway. But each of those gray dots is meant to represent a very simple mathematical object that sort of tears apart this picture of a cat into numbers And at the end, as it moves from left to right, it comes up with a prediction. Either it's a dog or it's a cat. And in this particular diagram, I'm trying to illustrate that the neural network has successfully said, yes, this is a cat, green. I have an example of a very simple neural network in action, but I think I'm going to skip this slide just to keep us moving towards my actual research. So let me pause there for a second and see if anybody has any questions about machine learning and neural networks. Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to say something about quantum. I imagine about quantum computing. Would you machine learning would be like part of quantum computing, or is it completely different?
So what would happen with quantum computing is that quantum computing would really speed up the process of machine learning. So quantum computing is a different way of organizing the hardware on the computer. And so right now, we're using hardware that kind of rhymes with the same hardware that we've been using for the last 60 or 80 years for computing. It's a lot more intricate, and it's become a lot smaller, but it fundamentally kind of is the same computer chip. And so it takes a lot of time to solve some of the optimization problems and do some of the calculations to allow the machine to learn. Quantum computing would speed that up. So the process of having the machine learn, is this a picture of a cat or is this a picture of a dog? We'd have the same algorithms, but they'd learn way faster if we were to get real quantum computing working. Good question, thanks. Any other questions? This is a great question, thank you.
Taylor.
So what you just demonstrated with the neural networks is what you use for the pulmonary stuff?
Yeah, we're about to get into that stuff right now, the actual research project that I work on. Just trying to give you some background on what machine learning and AI is.
Is what you just did like the kindergarten of facial recognition?
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, it is kind of the kindergarten. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, we're tried to talk about cats and dogs, but for sure the labels could be people's names. Then that absolutely could be. So you could have a bunch of pictures of people. You would need a bunch of pictures of people where you know who that person is. And that data could be collected from things like Facebook, things like Instagram, where people post pictures of themselves and tag themselves. And so this is happening, by the way, for sure. Those pictures are all scraped out of social media, and then you would train a neural network to know, okay, here's 17 pictures of Greg Petrics from Instagram and Facebook. Here's 25 pictures of, what's your name again? Sorry? Anthony, that you posted to Instagram and Facebook. I don't know if you're actually on the, okay, probably for the best. But let's just hypothetically say you were. And then everybody else's social media pictures, they would all get scraped as well. Then you tell the machine, okay, learn, what is it about these pictures that's Greg E, and Anthony E, and everybody else E. And then when a new picture is captured of you out in the wild, that machine learning algorithm would be able to give it a probability of that's 80% Greg, that's 90% Anthony, or so and so on. So that is how it works. Yeah, that's how it's working.
And you're teaching that class?
Yeah, I teach it in the spring. Yep. Yep. The hard part about this is always getting the data. So if you're wondering, like, what's hard about this? Actually training these algorithms is very, very straightforward, because the computer does all of it. And there's really good software out there for setting these algorithms up and having them learn from data. The hard part and the expensive part, that's what companies are spending tons of money on right now, is getting the data, getting that stack of pictures of Greg and Anthony and whoever else.
Yeah.
So why don't you have the companies that use this, but they specifically hire photographers to take pictures of the photographers and building the algorithm to find the pattern. So that way it will minimize cost, because you hire one photographer to take pictures of whichever you want to.
That's happening.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that's happening. There are companies that do their job is to collect and make these data sets where it's basically somebody has a problem that they want a machine learning algorithm to do. And if I'm understanding your question right, and they're hiring people, the term is actually called Turks, and Amazon is one of the biggest hirers of Turks. And their job is to go out and create training data for an eventual machine learning algorithm to learn from. And that is, the result of that turking is labeled data. So a bunch of pictures of whatever it is you want classified with labels. And then that's passed to the machine learning algorithm, which is pretty easy to learn how to do. But the data is the hard thing to come by. So that's what people are getting paid to do. Thanks for that question. We could do another question if you want. It's OK. We're doing on time. 4:30. Yeah, so we're about halfway through. So now would be a good time to start talking about my research. So I thought this would be a funny picture just to shake it up a little bit. So I use machine learning to automate and accelerate diagnosis of pulmonary pathologies. And so I looked for pictures of people who looked like they were having trouble breathing and were kind of funny. And I thought this meme picture was kind of a good one. Have you all seen this? This is usually in a meme where the woman's kind of breathless from just learning some troubling news or something. And then there's this other one that I saw that I was between both of them, and I was like, I have to put them both in there. They're both pretty funny. This is one of the women that's in one of those famous memes about the guy looking at his girlfriend, or looking at his not girlfriend. Apparently she's in these other pictures as well. Anyway, we don't need to talk about memes anymore. Just figured we'd sneak that in. So I use machine learning to classify what's called expiratory flow limitation. So expiratory flow limitation is what happens when you're breathing and you go to exhale, but you are attempting to exhale air, and the function of your lungs is disallowing you from exhaling that air as fast as you would like. And you can imagine that that would be a rather troubling thing to experience. It would cause it might cause like dyspnea, which is like just trouble breathing, COPD, stuff like that. So expiratory flow limitation, again, just is what happens when you, for whatever reason, are trying to exhale air. Probably exercising is when it happens the most, but not always exercising. Sometimes some very simple maneuvers, getting out of bed for older patients, it might be something they run into. They're attempting to exhale air, and the rate that they want to exhale air, or they're attempting to exhale air, exceeds the functional limit of their lungs. So that's called EFL. And I've got a few more notes about EFL. EFL is a contributor to ventilatory constraint and dyspnea. Diagnosing EFL is actually pretty time consuming. It's often misdiagnosed as a couple of other things, but true exercise flow limitation is pretty tricky to diagnose, and it generally requires 2 trips to a specialist in order to get it to be diagnosed. And a lot of clinical healthcare providers don't ever diagnose it. It's often really only diagnosed in academic settings if you go to a research hospital. This picture is meant to help you understand a little bit about EFL. Excuse me. So the blue line is an estimate of someone's maximal ventilatory capacity. So that's their maximal ability to exhale air at different points in their airway. So the horizontal axis here is volume. So that's where someone is in their expiratory cycle. So all the way to the right, their lungs are full. And then all the way on the left, their lungs are empty. And everything in between is everything in between. The blue line is someone's functional expiratory capacity. That's based on some lab tests that are pretty standard, but they take some time to establish that baseline. And then the other loops or curves are people attempting to exhale air. And so the red ones, what do you notice about the red ones? They're shaky a little bit. Yeah, they're all a little shaky, but as it compares to the blue line, what do you know about the red ones? They go past. I think it's simpler than you're thinking. They actually just go past the red line. So the blue line. So the red curves, those are all time series of someone exhaling air under exercise. Those are all going past that blue line. And the gray ones don't go past that blue line. They're all inside the person's ventilatory capacity. And I heard someone say something else. I don't know if they, sorry, I kind of talked over you. Oh, parabola. Oh, it's Randall. Hi, Randall. Good to see you again. So they do kind of look like a parabola, but they're not parametric. So there's no function that describes this. This is actually just data collected from someone hooked up to an airway machine. So each of those gray and red curves is 1 breath from a patient. And the red ones represent exercise flow limitation, EFL, and the gray ones represent normal expiratory function. So they're not hitting the ventilatory capacity of their lungs. So if you have that blue curve, it's pretty easy to diagnose expiratory flow limitation. You just look for if the curves go past the blue curve or not. If they do, the person is experiencing expiratory flow limitation. If they don't, then they're not experiencing expiratory flow limitation, and they're functioning within their normal ventilatory capacity. So what did I do? That's just basic science stuff in the world of pulmonary and thoracic science. What did I do? What I've done is I've developed what's called a convolutional neural network to identify EFL in adults with varying baseline airway caliber. And maybe to put it more simply, my model or neural network learned how to distinguish the red curves from the gray curves without that blue curve. The blue curve, you have to go to see the specialist twice to get that blue curve. You have to be put through a whole bunch of different challenges to discover what your ventilatory capacity is. And so that's why it's hard to diagnose, because you got to go get that blue curve first from one study at a specialist who puts you through the paces to discover what your ventilatory capacity is. Then, under some other challenges, they see if you're experiencing expiratory flow limitation, EFL, by seeing if your expired air either exceeds that ventilatory capacity or doesn't. So it's kind of a time-consuming thing. So what I did was I said, I wonder if we could use AI to learn which of these curves are red and which of these curves are gray without that blue curve. So that's really the project right there. It's kind of like figuring out if a picture is a picture of a cat or a picture of a dog, but it's different. We're identifying whether a curve is one type of curve or another type of curve. And critically, we don't get that blue curve as a reference. That's just there to help us understand what flow limitation is, EFL, but we're not going to get that in the machine learning case. And so this is where I think I've tried to boil down this research project into the simplest terms that I could come up with. This research project is really just about determining rules for helping anyone who wants to use them understand, is one of these curves that I'm about to show you, and I've got 2,931 of them if you want to take a close look. That's the data set. Is the curve going to be gray or is the curve going to be red? That's really what this research project is about. We've got all of these curves, and we have labels for all of them. So we know which ones are gray, non-EFL, and we know which ones are red, EFL. Can we have a machine come up with rules to make a prediction which ones are going to be gray, which ones are going to be red? That's what this AI algorithm is doing. And so I just have a video here of me just scrolling through the 2,931 curves. And there are all sorts of different curves to look at. And each one of these represents one exhaled breath.
Of one person, one pair of lungs?
No, I'll tell you a little bit about the subjects in a second. There's quite a few different subjects. And I think it's 22 subjects, men and women, different parts of their life. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Good question. So we see a bunch of red ones and a bunch of gray ones. Are there clues in these time series that can tell us that this is a gray curve and this is a red curve without knowing the color and without having that blue frame of reference to do the Yeah, there is some, we could play it again. There is some like wobbliness to it. So tend to be, yeah. So you're coming up with the rules, which is cool. And that's a very natural way to think about it. You're sort of taking a traditional programming approach. In a machine learning approach, I don't even know what the rules are. I'm going to set up, what I did was I set up a neural network that could come up with all sorts of different rules, some of which are like way more complicated than a human could even understand, because I'll tell you a little bit how you do that in a second, and have it figure out what are the rules that determine what makes a curve red and what makes a curve gray. That's pretty much it. In some sense, it's kind of like a facial recognition problem, but it's a curve recognition problem.
Because they have subtle differences.
Yeah, there's subtle differences in here in the shape, the pitch, that we aren't picking up on that a machine learning algorithm could. That's really all this project is just seeing if a neural network, which has the ability to come up with rules that are very, very sophisticated, can figure out what's making some curves gray and some curves red. And if it can do that, then it can diagnose EFL in real time, because you'd hook someone up to a breathing apparatus, and you'd be able to run this algorithm on their breath in real time and say, that's EFL, that's not EFL, and it would work very quickly, which would be a good thing to fix, because right now EFL takes 2 trips to a specialist to diagnose. I'm going to skip this slide. Don't think we really need to go over that. So my methods, and this is what the team worked on, we assembled 2,931 exercise flow volume loops from 22 subjects, 15 of whom were male, during what's called a graded exercise test. I'm actually not really sure what a graded exercise test is, because I'm the data science math guy here, and I just help them understand how to structure the data and whether this is a good problem or not, but I'm not actually in this area. I was able to help with the actual step-by-step process of classifying each of these 2,931 curves as to whether they were EFL or not. And the method that we use is called the Hyatt method. And I described that a little bit ago. That was, you just look at to see if the curve does or does not exceed that ventilatory capacity curve. That was the blue curve a few slides ago. And that was pretty much it. So it was a lot of work. Like, you can kind of tell there's like real work to be done here, right? You've got to sit down, you've got to organize the data, you have to have all of those blue curves for each of your 22 subjects, you have to place each breath appropriately inside the ventilatory capacity curve, then you have to see does it or does it not exceed that, and then come up with a label. So we spent time, and this is what some undergraduates helped with. This is what grad students helped with. This is what I did. This is what my collaborators did. And we also had to gather all of this data from labs. Like, there are exercise labs out in Washington State and UCLA that were gathering this data from subjects. So we set up this database. And then this is my contribution here. Then I set up a neural network which had 7 different parts to it. And you don't need to know what these parts are. I just had this slide kicking around from a talk that I gave at a conference. So you don't need to worry too much about this. But you can kind of think of it as it's that description of what are the mathy bits that go into this. So on the left is one exhaled breath, and then that goes into what's called convolutional layers. Then the rest of the stuff is pretty much just data processing. It's just distilling it down closer and closer until the neural network makes a prediction. So this is a diagram of the actual neural network that I established to try to solve this problem. And so what we did was we took, of those 2,931 records, we took 2/3 of them to train the machine. So that's like about 2,931. 2/3 of that's about 2,000 records or 2,000 curves. We used that for the training to have the machine learn what makes a curve red and what makes a curve gray. And then we set aside another third, which was about 1,000 more curves, to challenge the machine to see how well it did at learning, is it doing well at predicting if a curve is red or if a curve is gray. And so that's all described here on this slide. This is a little bit of information about the subjects, because I think, Anthony, you asked this question. So 15 male subjects, 7 female. The average age was 31.6 years, plus or minus 9.3. 1.7 meters, 81 kilograms, plus or minus 16, and a whole bunch of other pieces of information about the subject. So we tried to get a good cross-section of subjects with the funding that we had. So we never had unlimited funds to do this kind of research. So this was what we were able to get together. And hopefully we're going to have some funding soon to expand this project, or to tap into databases where there's already records that we could get access to. This is called a learning curve. This is a picture of how well the machine learning algorithm performed over its training process. So an epoch is one learning cycle. So you show the machine learning algorithm the data and the answers, and you say, learn one little bit about how to connect the data and these answers. And then you just keep doing that. And so the machine learning algorithm learned over 500 epochs, and it actually got cut off at that red line. That's the best. That turned out to be the best spot for it to perform. And so what you can see is those green, the orange and blue curves, they're getting higher. The vertical axis is accuracy. So that's how well is the machine learning algorithm performing as it spends time learning. Each epoch on my computer took about like 3 or 4 minutes. So each time we wanted to train it for 500 epochs, what's that math? I'd always just leave at night and it would be done in the morning. But that's kind of how it works with these machine learning algorithms. You set it up to do its learning process, and then it does it. And usually each cycle takes, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes or so. Oh yeah, question.
So, do you think that if you had a larger, data pool, the AI would have learned better? Because if you look at the graph, it's kind of a bottom.
Yeah, plateaus. Yeah, I don't know. We don't know yet. So we don't know. So what we've seen is, were you done with your question? Sorry.
I'm saying if you had like more data points, would you think that that was it plateaued, or do you think that if there were like more data points, it would be like more individuals instead of 22, say 100? Do you think the data would have plateaued later?
Yes.
Yeah, I do think that if we had more subjects and more breaths, I think it would plateau later. It's pretty normal in a lot of scientific applications of machine learning to get plateaus between epoch 200 and 500. But I would also expect, even more than the later plateau, I would actually expect it to be able to get a higher accuracy. And so what we can see here is the accuracy is approaching 0.9, so that's 90%. That's pretty good, actually. Like 90% is good. Because if it were just guessing, it would get it right about 50% of the time, because it's just yes or no. Does it have this condition or not? So you would expect 50% accuracy. So we're getting 90% accuracy. That's pretty good. It's a lot better than chance. And when we ran these algorithms, that was like, wow, there's something here. And we did this with very limited funds. We didn't have tons of funding. We had moderate funding to pay some people to help us out on this. And we got pretty good results, and we're publishing papers about it right now. And so that's pretty cool that we're getting it. And the goal soon is to get more data so that we can try to bump the accuracy up and also avoid these plateaus. Now, no matter what, there's going to be plateaus because we can't exceed 1 here. You can't go past accuracy 1. 1 is 100% accuracy. So that's as good as we're going to get. Good questions. Thanks. Anybody else have any questions? We're getting a lot of questions from 2 folks. Yeah, Randall.
What's the software you use for this?
Oh, so the software that I did the machine learning stuff in, I did it with TensorFlow and Keras packages in Python. That's a really good question. I realized I didn't put that in here anywhere. But TensorFlow is the main one. TensorFlow is Google's open source repository of machine learning and AI algorithms. And it makes it really easy, like really easy. After you get through the basic hair pulling of learning how to computer program anything, so if you have experience with Java or any other language, you'll find this very easy because you just have to learn a couple new syntaxes to get it done. And here's a summary of the results. So maybe the one to really pay attention to here is this 90.6%. So that's the overall accuracy, true positives and true negatives, TP, TN, divided by every classification that it made. So a classification is either a true positive, yes, the person has EFL, or a true negative, yes, the person, or no, the person does not have EFL, and that's the truth. Those are the true positives and the true negatives. Then there's also false positives, where the machine learning algorithm says this person has EFL, but it turns out that they don't actually have EFL. And then the false negative is when it says this person does not have EFL, but it turns out they do. So those are true positives and true negatives. And so overall, we had 90.6% accuracy. And then the true positive, just take a look at the time here, we're getting pretty close. The true positive rate was 85.1%. So that's, of all of the subjects in the database that actually had EFL, what percentage of those did I get correct with the algorithm? So we got 85% true positivity. The true negative rate was 93%. That was our highest accuracy level. So it was best at correctly identifying when a subject or a breath did not exhibit EFL. And then there's these other things, positive predicted value and negative predicted value, but we don't need to talk about those as much. And then this is just a summary of the results. And remember I said there was about 1,000 curves in the challenge phase. We used about 2,000 for training, and then we used about 1,000 for the challenge phase. All right, it's actually 968. And so the true positives and the true negatives are right there. We had 877 true positives and true negatives, and you just divide 877 by 968, and that's the 90% accuracy rate that I was talking about. So basic math right there for calculating all these percentages. And then there's your false positives and false negatives. So those are the mistakes. So out of 968 challenges to the machine learning algorithm made 91 mistakes. Not too bad. Yeah, Randall.
How does this compare to a doctor?
That's a good question. Well, remember, so it's a little bit tricky to say because the doctor, I don't know if you heard earlier, but like it takes the doctor 2 tries to do, you have to go visit the specialist twice. Once to measure your baseline ventilatory capacity, and then another time to actually put you through a baseline exercise test where you then fit that data from you doing exercise inside your ventilatory capacity. And so the doctor generally gets it 100% of the time, but they get they have 2 visits to do it. This represents at the 90% accuracy. That's 90% accuracy without that baseline. We don't have those ventilatory capacities. And that's what I think is kind of cool about this, is that the result is performing classifications without even knowing someone's ventilatory capacity. If you knew that, you're going to get it right 100% of the time, because you're just looking to see does the curve exceed or not exceed the ventilatory capacity. But in this challenge, we don't get that. And so I don't even know if anybody tries to diagnose EFL without ventilatory capacity. As we've taken this to conferences and published it, the consensus has kind of been like, wait, I thought you needed ventilatory capacity to say if somebody is experiencing exercise flow limitation. Yeah?
So how do you get to the conclusion that this is what you want to start?
That's a good question. So if we think back to what I started with, when I was in grad school, I got really into, let me see if I can find the slide here. I got really into these biologically inspired neural networks. It was a really fun project to do. I got to do a little bit of neuroscience, a lot of computer programming, and a lot of math. But I was into the idea of trying to understand how the brain works to process information. And when I was in grad school, it was about image processing, recognizing, is this a picture of this or a picture of another thing? And so I've always been interested in that. And then I was on it. So this person out in Washington State used to actually work here on this campus. And he emailed me one day and he said, I've had this problem and I'm wondering if you have anything that you can throw at it. And I literally said, that seems like a perfect application for neural networks, which I already was pretty familiar with. And that was kind of it. And it's been a lot of fun to work on, to just get into a totally different area. But thanks for asking that question. Let's see, let me go back to where we were. Let's see. Oh, we're pretty much done. So we were looking at this slide. So just a summary of the conclusions from the study. Overall, we got 90.6% accuracy of classifying EFL. I would summarize this as saying that the convolutional neural network, or CNN, accurately identified EFL in adults with varying airway caliber. Although it's not 100%, that's pretty good accuracy. Potential relevance of these results. For sure, down the road, if we can continue to replicate this in other data sets and get more data to train these algorithms on, this could have applications in clinical and research settings, and it absolutely could streamline EFL identification. And then where I think this is going next is kind of, we've already talked about this because of your excellent questions. Thanks everybody for those. But our sample size is pretty darn small. 3,000 curves, 3,000 records in a machine learning challenge is not a lot. Might seem like a lot of data, but it's not a lot of data. So we definitely need more data. And also, this kind of gets to Randall's question about how good is the doctor. We definitely could use some more accurate methods to determine EFL during exercise than what we have now. The Hyatt method, although it's the standard, it's actually not perfect. And people often complain of symptoms that sort of rhyme with or agree with EFL, and it's not getting diagnosed. But this might be able to come up with a better way of doing that. So some acknowledgements here. Just want to acknowledge my faculty collaborators, my grad student collaborator out at Washington State, and especially, and I hope that some of you will consider maybe taking up a course in data science. Like I said, that course in the spring is something you might want to enroll. It's MAT 3135, and I've hired people right out of that class to work on this project in the past. I really want to thank those 4 people so Corinne, Amy, Kara, and Sogi, who helped me work on this. Those wouldn't be able to do this without that student help, so thanks to them. And then a couple of references. I don't think these are all pretty just much technical papers, but I felt like I had to include them. If you want them, you could take a picture. I got 2 slides of pictures here. And then, yeah, question. Oh, sorry, let me go back. There's the first slide of references, if you're interested. I can also send the slides. I don't mind sending these slides. Do you have a Canvas page? Won't get them until after your page. OK, I do mind sending your slides. Yeah, because you have to, that's what this course is all about. There's the second page. And yeah, let's go to questions. So it's 4:58, perfect.
Do you use BMI in these calculations?
No, BMI doesn't show up in this at all. It's not considered, so it's, in machine learning, I didn't use this term, but you have something called your feature space, which is all of the data that you're willing to let the machine know about in order to make the diagnosis. And our feature space was really limited. We just kept it to data about the person's lung function. So we withheld the gender of the subject. We withheld the age. We withheld the BMI. We withheld their height. It was just the lung function. And that's forward-thinking a little. That was forward-thinking a little bit on our part. We would like this, if it ever gets to a clinical application, to be something you just hook it up, and it's like red, yes, EFL, gray, no EFL. You don't have to put anything else in. We're going to experiment with that down the road about putting in other things in the feature space, like maybe BMI, but we haven't done it yet, just to keep things simple, really.
Yeah. So I was just thinking it would be a good application for maybe people who go to physical therapy instead of having to see a specialist.
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's kind of the goal. That's what I think a lot, that's one of the good things that we could see out of AI. This is just one little tiny thing, right? That people experience all sorts of different problems across their entire body. This is just one little thing that can go wrong with you, but it's a pain to diagnose. And there's a lot of things like that. And I think that's a good home for AI to do those diagnoses, like in a physical therapy setting, which is a lot lower stakes, lower cost, more in the community, stuff like that. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Thanks. I meant to say that, but I didn't. But that's what you're here. Yeah. Yeah.
How would you say that you and your team addressed your research question? Like, what were your very first steps? How did you go about it?
So the very first steps on the research question were, the very first question was, this is something that's really tough to diagnose. Do you see any easier way? And honestly, I think I got asked about it when it first came to me. It was really about, could I write a computer program? Oh, I don't know why. Sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, I know why. No, I don't know why. I got asked to write a computer program about whether or not I could just, okay. About whether or not I could write a computer program that could just detect if a curve was outside or inside the ventilatory capacity. And I said, yeah, I probably could. I could. That wouldn't be a problem. But then I said, this seems like a perfect thing for AI, where we might be able to do this without that blue curve. And that's when the research question really started. Did I answer your question specifically enough, or did I go off topic?
Okay. I think you had your hand up first. Yeah.
Okay, so like, why don't you? I mean, after a couple more tests, why don't you like, I don't know, donate like copies to the app, like CAI, and like sell it to like some main agreement, for starters to get more data and also to increase funding for the CAI.
Well, I think we are, I guess maybe the answer is we are trying to do that. Like, we have the project on GitHub right now, so it's open source. So people can look at it after they've gotten to know about it. And we're right now organizing collaborators to get more data to make it better. I think I got your question right. Then I saw your hand, yeah.
What was your actual specific research question that was addressed?
Yeah, that was the same question before, and I never really answered it. Is it possible to diagnose EFL, which is expiratory flow limitation, without reference to ventilatory capacity? Sure. Is it possible to diagnose EFL, that's expiratory flow limitation, without reference to ventilatory capacity?
And you didn't use any past medical history?
No, I don't have any medical degrees of any sort.
Well, I just wasn't sure if you had the subjects. But I guess not.
Wait, what's the question? Everybody.
Not that the subjects had bad ones. You didn't use any, did you?
Had bad. Oh no, everybody was relatively healthy. Okay. Yeah, all the subjects in.
So that was a factor.
Yeah. So this study is only in subjects that are relatively healthy. Yeah, we're nobody who's experiencing like chronic COPD or anything like that.
Were there any subjects who had I don't know, did you gather any data after COVID?
Oh.
Yeah, there are subjects in this after COVID. I never thought of that before though.
So I wasn't sure if that.
Yeah, like if they'd had COVID or not.
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, on whether or not that had an effect on what it could have originally been, or
Good question.
Did you have any subjects come in who were if you could call and do it again, who you tested before COVID, and then if they got COVID, did you test that again and find out what that affected?
No, we didn't do that, and that would be a good thing to have in the feature space. Did the subject have COVID or not? That would be something that if we were to go to the clinical phase, meaning creating something that could be used in a clinical or physical therapy setting, that's something that you could quickly punch into the machine. Like, did the subject have COVID or not? We didn't keep track of it though.
Or any
Yeah, BMI, yeah, all those standard things that you can punch in easily without a complicated, invasive query.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what are your current
Sorry, one more time.
what is your current project regarding this field?
So my current project right now is when more data comes in, I retrain the models. But I also have another project with a professor over at UVM, Dr. Cataldo, which is helping to speed up some diagnoses of certain cancers that show up in basically in your guts, and that are pretty tricky to detect for radiologists on MRI. So that's what I'm currently working on, but that's just getting off the ground right now.
Yeah.
So what do you guys know what causes EFL, or if it's some specifics with
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's where I wish I knew this stuff a little bit better. I don't really know what causes EFL.
I don't know.
If you guys are just looking into diagnosing.
Yeah, I'm a data scientist on this side of things, and I actually don't know. I really should know that. So thanks for asking that.
Probably fitness and medical, medical history and stuff like that.
Like
comes into play.
It's kind of a funny one though, because it's not like asthma or COPD, because it's really when you go to exhale air and you functionally exceed the capacity of your lungs. That's when you hit it.
Did you say exceed?
Yeah, or run up against the functional capacity of your lungs.
Like you can't get it all out.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that here. If you think of this blue line as the maximal capacity of your lungs, EFL is when you're running right up against that. You see these red curves, they're bumping right up against the functional capacity of how quickly you can get air out of the lungs.
So it's kind of like they're breathing in a normal amount of air, or like a more than normal amount of air, but when they're breathing out, they have so much air that they can't breathe it all out.
It's not really that. It's not really that. It's really more about running into the physical limits of what your lungs are able to exhale. And it can cause some pretty distressing feelings when you run into that. Taylor?
So, do people with EFL have a higher percentage of pneumothorax?
What was the last thing you said? Something?
A higher percentage of pneumothorax.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I will write that down though and ask my thoracic collaborators on that one. A pneumothorax? I'll ask.
Spontaneous pneumothorax is when your lung collapses.
Oh.
So it can happen to tall, skinny people. Is actually during exercise where they'll just suddenly catch their breath and one lung is shrunk up a bit.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised if that was the case. But I don't know. Thanks for the question. Somebody else had a hand up over here? Yeah.
Okay. So, like, does it change throughout somebody's life? For example, say you did one of the studies, you did it for one person who doesn't have it, let's say like 20, like 40 or 50 years later, we do it again if they have it, like they actually have it. Is it, okay, sometimes is it, sometimes like you could get done your
Yeah. My understanding is yes, that is possible. Yep, it's possible to not ever experience EFL as a younger person, and then it can show up later in life. Yes. For why, that was kind of your question. I'm not sure, but yes. Yeah.
Have you found anything in common with this and people who have asthma?
Yes. In general, asthma is associated with EFL. But that's actually not my finding. That's like well known to other researchers. Yeah.
So you said you tested people who were like relatively healthy. If you tested more people with the EFL, do you think that would change the results at all?
That's a really good question, and we're not really sure. And that's what we're hoping to take a look into next. The prevalence of EFL in this data set was actually reasonably high as the subjects were put through various graded exercise challenges that got harder and harder. So that it showed up, I want to say, like overall pretty close to 40% of the time in our database. And so I think what your question really is like if we just had less healthy people in the subject pool, would that change things? And I don't know. I mean, that's like we're in the Wild West right now. This is really different from how a lot of research has gone before. I don't know, but my instincts tell me that as we get a more diverse pool of subjects in the training data, our results will actually get slightly better. And that's from experience in other machine learning settings where when the training data pool gets larger and more diverse, your results almost always get better. For reasons that are not entirely understood in the world of data science. But it's like a classic example of this, I always like sharing this one, is people maybe 10 years ago tried to come up with an automated sign language translation tool. So it would take pictures of someone's hands who is signing and then translate that into written English. And they they did the project, so they had a bunch of videos of people signing, and then they had the appropriate translations, and they had the machine learn how to translate the signing, and it worked pretty well. And then it really just was not getting through. And then they challenged it on some people signing who were people of color, and it did really poorly on them, on those people signing. And they realized that the problem was they'd never actually had a diverse pool of data in the training data. So they had no people of color in the training data. So that was already a pretty big problem. So the algorithm didn't work on people of color at all who were signing. And the algorithm wasn't working that well at all in general. And so they redid the whole thing. They included a much more diverse population into the training data, and the whole thing got better. It obviously improved dramatically on people of color, but it actually improved overall as well. And that's sort of a theme in a lot of data science, is the more diverse your training data, the better it gets, for reasons that aren't fully understood.
Good question.
So how large of a study population would be large enough to have it diverse?
That's the million-dollar question. How large of a data set do you need?
Would it 50,000 be too small or too big?
So this question that you're asking, how big of a data set do you need for a machine learning algorithm, is a really important question right now in machine learning writ large. And there was actually a paper published just last year, which was really cool, which said that if your training data is a sufficiently representative data set of the population you're trying to make the algorithm work on, you actually only need about 1,000 cases, which is not big. But the problem is it's really hard to make sure that you have a sufficiently representative training data set. So that, and so that's why people just go bigger and bigger to get to that representative point. It's okay if you're overrepresented with certain types of cases when you train machine learning algorithms. You just need those subjects in there. So the question is, how big do we need to get before we have a sufficiently representative group? Right now we only have 22 subjects, but my instincts would tell me about 1,000 subjects would probably get us as far as we'd ever get.
Yeah.
How likely do you think it is that this will be integrated into like modern medicine and like the way the doctors diagnose people?
Medium likely. I don't. It's a little. Yeah, I mean we're so early in this. Like we just got our we've presented our first conference on these results, and no one's ever done anything like this before. We presented our first conference on this last summer. We got our first paper out last fall, second paper out right now. People are just kind of starting to come around. It really depends on if people pick it up or not. Is this something that the community says this is a viable approach? This particular thing, I don't know, like 10, 20%, but the general principles of this, 100%. It's already there. Like there's already cases in healthcare where this is happening. So yeah, sort of bad news and good news. Good question. Yeah?
So it's seen as medical whatever requires a lot of, like, say, for this and for also revolutionary clinical applications. It usually takes, I'd say, 20 or 30 years to look at anything from psychoanalysis to penicillin and
Right.
It takes like 20 to 40 years before
Yeah.
changed. And that's after they got physical cast research like top notch, like and everybody.
Yes.
Well, I didn't actually hear a question, but I heard, sorry.
So, going off of what Pastor said, like, wouldn't it take up 20 to, I'd say, maybe 15 years, assuming that one of the principal researchers is really well respected, top-notch professor, or anybody who knows anything about the field, it's like, yeah, that's this really huge name, the guy who discovered the penicillin, Sigmund Freud for psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess you're right. They would take about 20 years. And it has historically taken like 20 years to get things like this into the broad clinical usage. I think that's reasonable to expect. Although I would say that some of these AI changes that are getting developed right now, they're getting to clinical settings really quickly, particularly in radiology. Results in radiology of having an AI assist or even outright perform an analysis of some study, whether it's MRI or X-ray or whatever, those things are getting to production in clinical settings fast, much faster than 20 years. So, it's hard to say where we are. So yeah, I think we're coming up on time.
We are out of time.
15,
If you
5:16. Yeah.
If you have more questions, you don't have to come down and ask. But thanks, our speaker. Thank you, Greg, very much.
Thank you.